Agency of Education is the state agency that's responsible for implementing all of the federal child nutrition programs. So the National School Lunch Program, the Summer Food Service Program, the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And then we also administer the TFAP program, which is food that the federal government purchases for the Vermont Food Bank. So we're quite involved in this. All of these federal programs have lots of federal regulations. And so usually when you have me come talk to you, you want to know, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that with these programs? And the answer is usually the feds say we can't do that. It's federal money. We put a very small amount of state money towards kind of supplementing and supporting these programs, but mostly it's federal money. And if we want the federal money, we have to follow the federal rules. And I know that's not an answer you like to hear, but that's sort of the way it is with these programs. And there was a mention earlier of fat content in milk. And unfortunately, that's the case there. That's a rule set by the feds. If we want the federal money for these meals, we have to follow their rules about low-fat milk. So, but COVID has been a really interesting situation with regard to federal rules. So fairly quickly, when schools started closing in March, we realized that the federal rules were not written for this circumstance. And so we immediately started beginning to apply for waivers of the federal regulations. And since March, we have applied for 38 waivers at the Agency of Education. In addition, we've received a bunch of nationwide waivers. So first it was states filing individual state waivers, and eventually USDA kind of caught up to it and realized that, this shouldn't just be done on a statewide basis, that nationally they needed to issue waivers, and Congress gave them that authority to do that. So the programs that we are running now look very, very, very different than what they would look like in a normal year. We have waivers that allow us to serve all children 18 and under. They don't need to be a student. We can operate open meal sites where any child 18 and under can receive a meal. We can offer multiple days worth of meals at a time. We can have parents pick up meals on behalf of children. Children don't need to eat meals in a congregate setting altogether. They can take the meals off-site. We have some flexibility with the meal pattern. There's just a whole host of regulations that used to be just really strict and set in stone that we've been able to get waived. And so we're doing a lot with that. And programs have used that flexibility to continue providing meals to kids. During the spring, a lot of folks were actually delivering meals on school buses to households. Since the spring, we've moved more towards pickup models where households have to go to a location to pick up the meals, but we are able to offer multiple days worth of meals at a time. And more recently, we have some programs that have started some really innovative meal kit boxes that are basically the ingredients for a week's worth of meals rather than individually packaged meals. And that's really being well received where that's happening across the state. And we're really encouraging that model. Since September, we've had the challenge of not only trying to provide meals to kids in their homes, the remote learners, but also trying to provide meals to kids in school and still keep everybody COVID safe. And it's often the same food service program is having to do both things. They're having to produce meals for the remote learners and produce meals for kids in their classrooms. So these programs have again shown just enormous creativity and willingness to figure it out, and they're doing it. But they're getting pretty tired, and that's something that's always a concern to me. We've really asked our school food service staff statewide to really keep working and keep pushing on a really high level. Since March. Normally, these folks would have had some time off over the summer, but we asked them to keep providing meals over the summer. Normally, they would have some breaks around the holidays, but we asked them to keep providing meal kits and meal boxes over the holidays, and they've done that. These folks really are dedicated and really want to ensure that children have access to meals. But that's definitely something that I'm thinking about as we come up to this summer, and we're not sure yet what this summer is going to look like, because USDA currently hasn't extended these waivers past the end of June, although Congress has given them the authority to do so. So as the new administration comes in, we're going to be paying attention and advocating for potentially some extensions of the waivers to allow folks to continue meal service through the summer. But assuming we get some flexibility there, the other piece that we need to be aware of is, how do we staff that? How do we keep these programs operating? We've asked a lot of our programs and we don't want to break them. So that's something that's definitely a concern for me. And the same is kind of true for my staff. We have 9 child nutrition program staff members at the agency, and all of us have been working on COVID kind of nonstop and working on writing these waivers, providing technical assistance. We've done individual technical assistance calls with every single school food authority in the state. And we did a round of those in the fall, and we're about to start a round of those in the spring. And we're doing that rather than our intensive monitoring that we normally do, because we want to give everybody the assistance to be able to serve meals safely and well during this time. So the team at AOE has really been working hard as well. And I'm also concerned about how do we keep that going. And I think my big ask for you today is really to keep it simple for us this year. We are are working like crazy, and I haven't even touched on all the different things that we're doing. I did provide some written testimony to you that talks about everything that we're doing. And if you're thinking about any new programs, the purchasing incentive, I would just ask to give us some time for implementation, to keep it as simple as possible. If you want to provide additional funding, I've given some advice in the past, and I'm happy to do that again, about the simplest ways to just inject a little bit of funding into the programs without adding a lot of administrative burden for us or the schools. And to just keep that in mind this year would really be my ask today. So
have you ever seen us do anything that's simple? We have too many lawyers working for us, Rosie, to keep it simple. But anyways, I'm sorry to interrupt you if I did.
Nope.
No.
I provided you some written testimony about everything, so I'm really happy at this point to just kind of answer whatever questions you all have. I'm happy to talk more about any of those pieces of work that we're doing that I mentioned in the written testimony. But I know you've got a lot of other speakers today, and I would really love for you to be able to hear from them.
Yes, and also, when we get our simple piece of legislation put together, we'll have you in to help us with. Are there questions from Chris? You have a question?
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Our thinking is always as simple as the federal rules that oversee the work you do, Rosie. This is where the complication starts surfacing. But I've been thinking of you a lot because, as you know, I have elementary school kids, and every time we get an email from the school, school's dismissed early, we're having a holiday, but food pickup is available, or double the pickup will be available Thursday because Friday's off. It's really impressive. And I have thought of you often, knowing that you're well behind the scenes driving a lot of this. We've talked about in the past how messed up it is, the way that districts basically pay food staff. It's different in a lot of schools. It's not part of the base budget, blah, blah, blah. You mentioned that you've asked staff to work over the holidays to, this burden that the people doing the work have felt. And I'm curious, are you aware of, maybe I should know this, but has the state in any capacity added money for these people who are working more, or is all that burden fallen on the districts, or is that one of the places that we've used CARES money to help school budgets? Can you just help us understand that picture?
So under the waivers that we've got, I mentioned all these meals are free to all children, and that's because the federal government is paying for the meals. So each meal is reimbursed at the free reimbursement rate, which is around $4 per meal for a lunch, around $2 per meal for breakfast.
And that's
So
separate from CARES money, is that right?
yeah. So that's just the normal like child nutrition funding. We basically taken it's kind of wonky and I didn't really want to dive too far into it, but basically the feds are allowing us to operate the summer food service program year round. And that allows us to feed any child 18 and under instead of operating the National School Lunch Program, which would just be limited to children at school. And so when we're asking folks to, continue working over the summer, continue working over vacations, it's to produce meals and they get reimbursed by the feds for each of those meals. I should be clear, we haven't mandated that anybody do meals over the summer or over vacations. It's just a strong ask. And that was one of the things this summer, we asked you to help us provide some assistance in terms of equipment so that folks felt more able to provide meals over the summer. And by the time that money got out the door, I think it was a little bit late. So it didn't have as much of an impact as we had hoped, but certainly it was still helpful. So there isn't additional state money going to pay for staffing specifically, but there is funding coming in, assuming that extra work equates to more meals served.
Thank you.
Any other, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Rosie, I think our phrase maybe for this session should be do no harm. Hopefully we can live up to that. And I'm trying to just understand, I thought I heard you say that, I think the bill number was S273 last year, which had the pricing incentives for buying more food locally in it. Were you saying that you would prefer that we not take that up during this session?
I think if you were to take it up, I would prefer a delayed implementation of it. I really can't see us getting ready to start working on that July 1st. That's just not something we have the brain space to work on. And frankly, the folks at the school level who would be most involved in that are the business managers. And these are the folks who are having to deal with all that different federal funding. They're going to be dealing with trying to manage all that and the audits and everything. And I just don't think that they have capacity to deal with it right now either. So I would certainly ask you to delay any implementation of it. I did provide some pretty extensive testimony on that last year. And I found I do still have the written testimony, and I'm happy to provide that for Senator Parent because you all heard from me on that. I think we have some significant concerns at the agency that it's far more complicated than it needs to be, the way that it ended up written last year. And I know you had made some changes since then, and I haven't had a chance to really delve into that further. But based on the way the bill was written last year, it felt fairly complicated. I'm never going to say no to more child nutrition funding, but I felt like there were much more efficient ways that you could have spent that in order to get a good outcome. And so that I think we're not against it, but there might be some simpler, better ways to accomplish your goals.
All right, thank you, Rosie.
And probably your plate is pretty full.
Yes.
So you haven't got much room to add anymore.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Rosie? If not, thanks a lot, Rosie, for your time, and we'll certainly be talking with you as time goes forward.
I will also mention, Senator, that you all had asked in a previous farm to school bill for a report every year on local food spending. And that report is due at the end of January, and we are preparing to send that over. So you will see that in the next few days from us, and that hopefully will help you provide you some good information on what's currently happening with local food spending.
Yep, very good. Thanks. So we'll move on to Meg from the Agency on Aging. Welcome, Meg, and good morning.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I'm Meg Burmeister. I'm the Executive Director at the Northeast Kingdom Council on Aging. There are 5 area agencies on aging overseen by Dale, and those provide home delivered meals program to residents 60 and older through the Older Americans Act, and then somewhat in conjunction with people who are disabled through VCIL. The 5 agencies are AgeWell, the Central Vermont Council on Aging, Northeast Kingdom Council on Aging, Senior Solutions, and the Southwestern Vermont Council on Aging. So as you can see, we cover the entire state. These meals provide a third of the recommended daily intake as prescribed by USDA. Menus are reviewed by a registered dietitian with oversight by the Area Agency on Aging. And the Older Americans Act long ago placed value on the grassroots approach to ensuring that community need was represented on a local level. And many of you see that. There are varied models of how meals programs relate to their geographic region in the state of Vermont. And several of the more populated models in the state do so through larger vendors, and other systems use smaller nonprofit meal providers. When the pandemic began to hold, the home delivered meal system nimbly adapted to a rules suspension by the Administration on Community Living, which oversees the program at a federal level. And the rule was suspended, stated that people who were over 60 had to meet criteria to be homebound and have difficulty or need assistance with activities of daily living or physical or mental conditions, making them unable to prepare food. With that rule suspension, that really opened the door to anyone who needed home delivered meals contacting us and being able to receive them. One of the complications with home delivered meals is that most of our drivers are volunteers, and they, in many cases, are over the age of 60 themselves. And though we saw people decide to end their volunteerism, others stepped up to the plate, and the programs continued without a pause. Increased demand and increased numbers of meals per week quickly impacted the programs, and this surge has not subsided. Congregate meals moved to takeout meals for many sites, and home delivered meals increased. Since March, we've seen between 25 and 40% increase, and that range represents the diversity throughout the state. And that has not really reduced dramatically. Of course, we all thought in March that we would be seeing an end in sight, and the realities of our world now are very different than what we anticipated. We were able to receive funding through the Older Americans Act, through the Families First and CARES Act. It was a generous allocation, and the funds came with a provision that they could be expended through the fiscal year 2021. This allowed us to meet the demand. And as I just mentioned, we all thought at that time that we would see an end in sight. So we really funded that increase in volume using those funds. Those funds are also supported by 2 legislative actions that provided CARES funding through the state of Vermont this past fall that increased the amount we were paying per meal to the meals providers. And currently we're working with Dale to arrange or develop a comprehensive plan for managing demand, because the funding is not at a sustainable level. The funds that we have received from the federal government through the Older Americans Act, by and large, are being expended or have already been expended in some agencies because of the demand for meals and the volume of numbers of meals being produced. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, the federal Older Americans Act, that money is being, I mean, they didn't allow you or give you enough to cover the cost of these meals, or that 25 to 40% increase in signups has driven that away or used that money up? Is that?
Yeah, the contracts that we have with our meal providers, sets forth a budgeted amount per year. We certainly increased that, thinking that we would be nearing the end of the pandemic at some point in this journey, and that did not occur. So the What we see is that there's increased demand every time that there's a surge in an area, that people are still very frightened to leave their homes to go grocery shopping. And some people really have self-isolated just in an attempt because they're high risk in nature by virtue of their age.
Yep. Other questions from the committee? If not, one more quick one. You have made your request to Dale, and I'm wondering, we're going to have them in the near future in appropriations to present their budget. How is your portion of that budget being dealt with by the commissioner?
Part of that is the expectation that we come up with a plan to handle both looking at the funds that were expended, looking at the demand, and then coming up with a plan on how to respond to that. On a national level, what we've seen is that many states are now moving to wait lists or reduced numbers of meals per week to be able to contain costs, because there has not been additional federal funding in the amount needed to support an ongoing sustained high level of meals.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, and we'll keep an eye out for it. Any other questions from the members? If not, thank you, Meg. And next on our list is John Stiles from the food bank. Welcome, John, and good to see you, and be glad to hear from you.
Welcome, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I was wondering if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I would like to defer my testimony. Oh, did Carol just pop off? Oh, there she is.
No.
Carol Kent. Oh, you turned your video on so that we can keep the school stuff closer together and make it flow a little more. Would that be okay?
Sure, and yeah, that would be great. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
So, Kale?
Thank you. My name is Carol Kent, and I'm president of the School Nutrition Association of Vermont. We're affiliate of the National School Nutrition Association. I'm also director of school nutrition at Lamoille North Supervisory Union. I just want to, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk to you all and share with you what's actually going on in the schools and how we are affecting families and our communities. I want to give a big shout out to the AOE Child Nutrition team who have been working with us since the moment this dropped on us back in March. Weekly calls with school nutrition professionals across the state and helping us navigate all the waivers that have come our way. I don't have to tell you that back in March when this first happened, you've heard the stories of how school nutrition teams sprung into action, how we came to the call delivering meals on buses, curbside pickups. It was monumental, and we barely stopped. There has really, as Rosie said, there's hardly been a vacation break for anybody. And our teams, our cooks, they're happy to do it. They are essential, and the work we're doing is just what motivates us, because these are our neighbors, and these are our kids. When we started back, well, let me back up. The waiver to serve meals for free to all kids 18 and under was a godsend. And it really kind of set a precedent of what communities and what schools need to do to care for their children. When we started back to school in the fall, those waivers had ended, and we were really afraid. And as school food service directors weren't afraid of the virus, and we were not afraid of all the revenue we were probably going to be losing. We were really afraid that kids who were on free and reduced meals were really going to be overtly identified in the classroom. Because with meals going back to being free, reduced, or full priced, it was probably mostly free and reduced kids that were going to be eating meals in the classroom, and it would be known to everybody who was low income. That was our greatest fear, and how were we going to deal with that? So when the waiver came back to do the summer food service program and meals were free again, it was just a huge weight off the shoulders of everybody. And if I could take just a moment to read you a statement from one of my teachers, it kind of sums it up. And she said, "I have 10th graders in our high poverty school. When I told them on the first day that school lunches would be free, I saw the relief on many faces. They didn't have to think about hunting through the fridge and cabinets at home, trying to scrounge up something to bring for lunch. And some of them laughed out loud, telling me that this was great news because they hadn't brought anything in for lunch and they were just going to go without." Every other week or so, one of the students would check in with me again on this. Our school lunch is still free. There was a fear that the program had ended and that they wouldn't know, and their families would wind up with a bill they couldn't afford. And as winter break approached and the end of 2020, I fielded that question again and again as students wanted reassurance the program would continue through the new year. So these free lunches were more than just fuel, more than nutrition. They were about our reassurance that they wouldn't go hungry, that adults would take care of them, that their school was a safe place, and that the pandemic wouldn't win, that it was all going to be okay. And those free lunches meant family and community and hope. And the reason I share that is because we're beginning to become fearful again of what happens when the free meals stop. And how do we tell these kids that we can't feed them lunch? Our big ask is for universal school meals. And it's a really big ask. And we understand that at the state level, that's going to take a lot of innovation, reinvention, a lot of work. We would like that to come down from the federal level, but if it doesn't, we're really asking Vermont to step up and try to find a way to continue feeding all kids for free. It has eliminated the stigma in schools. It's eliminated shame. It's eliminated kids being hungry, kids hiding food, teachers paying for school meals. All those things that you see in the data from Hunger Free Vermont has borne out. It happens. Our kids are more attentive. I have pages and pages of statements from teachers and principals and from parents. Kids' attention level is focused and they're learning better. They're prepared throughout their day. And that's because they don't have to worry about their parents getting a big bill and where the next meal's coming from.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'd like to thank you all for the equipment grants. That was a huge help at a time when we really needed it. And the farm to school grants were also just really, really important to us. I'd like to also share that we got caught up in the beginning of the school year with the supply chain issues of getting the produce that we needed, as they did across the country. And we were able to turn to our local farms for produce and the vegetables we needed. What made it possible to do that was the extra reimbursement that we received from the Summer Food Service Program. That little bit of extra money made it possible for us to make more purchases locally and to support our local farms. Up here in Lamoille, we've been purchasing from West Farm, Green Mountain Farm Direct, Kingdom Creamery, and so on. So that's been extra money going right into our communities, and they've acknowledged what a big help that's been for them. So we'd like to speak in support of the Vermont Food for Vermont Kids program, the local purchasing initiative. When we can make that happen, it'll be a great benefit to all of our schools and all of our farmers. Parents have shared with us that the food they're getting in the meal kits, because many of us are doing bulk meal kits to send home, they're getting a lot of local produce that they've never tried before, fresh fruit and vegetables that they typically can't afford to purchase, and that kids are eating more healthfully at home than they have before. They're cooking together as families. They're learning how to cook kale and how to cook leeks and other root vegetables. So it's been a win-win. The pandemic has opened up so many opportunities for us to respond locally and healthfully and just bring our families so much support.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your testimony and thoughts. And yeah, it has been great having the Universal Meals programs since last March. It's worked out very well. Of course, our committee supports that very much. The big issue is, of course, trying to find the money to pay for it. And but anyhow, it's been a good run trying Universal Meals out, and we've had certainly good participation. So are there any other questions from the committee? We've got to wrap this up but like by 10:40. So we got 8 or 10 minutes left, and then we got to switch over. But and for those, I don't know who wants to go next. If John, you want to be up next, but we're going to get the rest of you back in. It probably will be just early next week.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would you like to go now, John? And of course, if you need to, you can come back next week too, if you have time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I can get everything in just a few minutes. And thank you, committee members, for holding this hearing today and all the other testimony. I mean, it's obviously we don't have to say that this is something in Vermont that we can do something about, and we are. Particular thanks to Professor Niles for all the research they've done, which is really helpful in kind of letting us understand the extent of the issue here and to show what we can do. Also, I want to say that my testimony is on the site along with some supporting documentation, and that under Fay Mack's name, there is an overview of all the asks, and I'm going to have a couple of asks here. So I just want to let you know what the food bank's been doing. We're really grateful for the support of the state, particularly since March when you know, everything hit the fan, and the National Guard and the state SEOC and the Agency of Human Services and the legislature with CARES Act funding. It's just been an outpouring of support and allowed the food bank to respond in the way that we really wanted to. And we continue to. This hunger crisis is not going away. And, you know, we were at 1 in 10 people food insecure. Now we're at 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 4. It's going to take a long time. I know there was some testimony about people maxing out their credit cards to buy food, and it takes a long time for people to recover from that. So we'll be here for the long run. The food bank, to address that increased need, has doubled our distribution since March. For fresh food, local food, fresh local food, it's up 63% from last year. And our fiscal year ends in September, and this first quarter of the new year, our fresh food distribution is up 77%. So we're out there. Because of the CARES Act funding and other food bank support, we spent in the last fiscal year $975,000 on local food, from Vermont growers and producers, and hope to continue a really high level of partnership with our Vermont growers. We also have been providing mini grants to food shelves and meal sites in all of your communities. And those are grants of, between $1,000 and maybe up to $10,000, where the local food shelf or meal site can then purchase directly from a small farmer. Some of the farms are really a little too small for the food bank's logistical nightmare. And so it makes a lot more sense for the parent-child center or the food shelf or the meal site in that community to get a CSA or local deliveries. I'll get right to the asks because I know we're really short on time. There are 3 ways that the state can continue to help the food bank and support our neighbors here in Vermont. One is the food bank is right now conducting our own, we're calling it the Vermont Farmers to Families program, where we're doing 500 food boxes a day for 8 weeks at locations all over the state, working with the Abbey Group, and those boxes include at least 50% Vermont product. That's a $1.5 million program, and our request that we've talked to the administration about also is to get some funding to support that through the Budget Adjustment Act, or perhaps if there's any additional CARES Act funding or from additional federal funding that comes in. Again, we were at the legislature last year, and we'll be there again this year as the food bank asking for a $500,000 annual appropriation for Vermonters feeding Vermonters. And every dollar of that money will go directly to purchasing food from Vermont growers and producers that would then be distributed within the food bank system. Finally, if more federal funding does become available, the food bank has a budget to keep us producing and getting food out at these pandemic levels. And that will be about $7 million. That includes that $1.5 million for the Vermont Farmers to Families program. And what do? We have 20 monthly and twice a month distributions for our Veggie Van Go program. We partner with 215 food shelves and meal sites all across the state in each of your communities. We supply food to 42 SASH housing sites around the state. And there's a program that provides 55 CSA shares of culturally responsive food to New American communities in the Burlington area. And a lot more, but we don't have time to talk about that. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, thank you, John, and thank you for all the work you've been doing with our food shelves and around the state since last spring. And I think we should be proud. We as Vermonters are proud of taking care of our own citizens and making sure that that no one goes hungry. I'm wondering if Helen and Betsy and Faye and any of the rest of you could come back another day. I'm sorry that I guess we should have started earlier or gone longer and moved things, but it's a very trying time in our time. But we're going to be spending, we as a committee, a lot of time on food security, and we're going to be working, of course, with all of you folks and other partners to make sure we get this as right as possible. I don't know if Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question for John. Thank you for all the vital work you're doing. I'd heard from a constituent who's got celiac, I think is how you say it. It's a little like Crohn's, yeah. And finds it and is got low income and dependent on food bank, and says it can be quite hard to find appropriate food. Could you just comment on that? Is there any plan? I'm sure he's not alone. It's obviously hard. You're juggling a lot of competing pressures, but just wondered if you had any thoughts and any plan to help somebody like him out.
Yeah, you know, celiac are people who don't or cannot tolerate gluten. And as we know, when it comes to processed foods of any kind, there's generally gluten in them. And so it's very, very challenging for us to have separate enough of food that is certified gluten-free and to make it available to all of our partners in a way that's equitable. I would actually, if you would refer the person to me, I'd be happy to work with them and figure out where in their area is the best place to get more of the kinds of foods that they can tolerate. This is not just a problem in Vermont with food banks and the charitable food system. It's a problem across the country, and just a really challenging one. It's hard for people who have plenty of income and have celiac disease, and it's just really, really challenging when you have really limited means.
I'll try to connect him with you by email. Thanks, John.
Yeah, anything else from the committee? If not, I want to thank all of you folks for being with us this morning, and we'll be sending out invitations for our meeting next week when we work on foods. So thanks again, and sorry that we couldn't get everybody through this morning, but it certainly shows that this is a very serious, subject matter, and that we're trying to take it serious, and in working with all you, I know we can build a better system of food supplies for our people. So thanks again for being with us. Committee members, would you like to take a couple of minute break, and then we have the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance with us, and I see Amanda's already on, and so we'll be hopefully getting going by 10:45 or shortly thereafter. So if you'd like to just stop for a minute to catch your breath, we'll take a little break. Well, there's three of us back.
Yeah, that's a quorum.
Yeah, and Amanda's with us. So good morning, Amanda, and welcome to the hearing. I guess it isn't so much a hearing, it's just hear from you folks and what you'd like to tell us about how things are going and what you'd like to see in the future. We did have the Division of Financial Regulations do a study on milk marketing here in Vermont and how we might, if we might be able to do an order, a Vermont milk order our own. And so we're gonna have that, it's a 44-page report that I believe it's on our website. So we're gonna have a hearing next Thursday, a week from tomorrow. And we've kind of kept the whole morning open for that, where the commissioner and his staff will come in and give us an overview and report on their findings. And certainly we're going to invite all you folks and other, like St. Albans Co-op or DFA Co-op or Agri-Matter, anyone that wants to participate to sit in and listen. So we may as well get started. We've got an hour and 15 minutes or so to hear from you folks, and it's good to see all of you, and you're certainly all very welcome. So I don't know if you want to go according to the way the list is set up, but I have Amanda first and Brian and Bordeaux and then the Hills. But if you want to switch around because of time, just speak up and we'll take care of it. So with that, Amanda, thank you for being with us and be glad to hear from you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, committee. We will have to do some change ups. We had one young member who's we were excited to offer testimony today that's having a hard time with technology. We're buried in snow here, and he's having some difficulties with his phone line being down and different things. So Caden DeBurge, I'm not sure, will be joining us, and Jacob Bordeaux, I'm not sure as well. He was in another meeting, so we'll play it by ear. And I'm hoping Josh Poulin can join us. He was on the House committee earlier, so I appreciate the fluctuation that you're allowing us today. But to get started,
before you start, we do have a new member on the committee, Senator Parent from St. Albans. The rest of us have been together for the last 2 or 3 years, and so I think you folks know most of us except for maybe Senator Parent. So go ahead, Amanda.
Welcome, Senator. My name is Amanda St. Pierre, and I'm currently serving as the Executive Director of Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance. I also farm here in Berkshire with my family. And I appreciate an opportunity to be before you again, as I said. The Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance is comprised of dairy farmers and industry partners in the farming industry representing dairy as well as other agricultural farms of all sizes throughout the Vermont. The Alliance works together with members, industry partners, and state government to adopt regulations that won't cripple the economic viability of the Vermont dairy industry. The Alliance supports and encourages the growth and viability of agriculture in Vermont while being mindful of the environmental impacts to Vermont's working landscapes and waterways. The Alliance was formed to increase the voice of dairy farming, both within the legislative and regulatory arenas. Members are from farms of all sizes working in conjunction with industry members, to ensure a sustainable dairy sector in Vermont. We think that we have brought together a group of members today that will provide you with COVID-19 experience and how they have tried to make it through. We believe that you will hear that milk prices are very important, but through the pandemic, the expense side of the ledger has created much angst among members. As we move away from the pandemic, you will hear that the next 12 months are not going to be rosy. And looking back to 12 months ago, dairy producers were anticipating a good year ahead as well. Obviously, this has not happened, but you will hear testimony showing that with the help of government assistance, both federal and local state government, we have made it through. I would like to introduce now the new chair of the VDPA Board of Directors, Brian Carpenter, to submit testimony on our behalf.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda, and welcome, Brian. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Senator Starr and Senate Ag Committee. It's been a couple of years, I believe, since I've testified in your committee, Senator Starr.
Yep.
So for those who don't know me, my name is Brian Carpenter. I'm the principal owner of Champlain Valley Equipment, and I'm currently serving as the chair of the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance. I joined the Alliance back when we first founded the Alliance as an allied business, and see the very need to promote dairy within Vermont, and I'll talk about that in my testimony. Our business, Champlain Valley Equipment, operates 4 locations in Vermont. We employ roughly 100 full-time employees. Our business was founded in 1970. My father, we were dairy farmers ourselves, and he moved from dairy farming to farm equipment in 1970. We're proud of our service and support to much of Vermont. Just to give you an idea of how important to Vermont's economy some of the allied businesses are. In 2020, CVE paid out $5.3 million in wages to our employees. We remitted over 1.3 million in sales taxes and 166,000 in personal Vermont income tax withholdings to the state of Vermont. Our single largest industry and the mainstay to our equipment sales, parts, and service, which drives our employment numbers, is Vermont's dairy industry, and that's all of the farmers, not just we have some larger farms on the call today, but it's all of the Vermont dairies. Our family's business is many years of observing and participating in the ups and downs of dairy, which has been sometimes robust while at other times struggling. We've watched through the years as trends emerge or rules and regulations promote or mandate new farming practices. These acts affect not just the dairies, but all of us involved in agriculture throughout the state. Vermonters in the ag industry have spent a great deal of time, effort, and energy identifying the best agricultural practices focused on preserving our water, soil, and air. Technology and innovation enable today's producers to track exactly how many and where seeds were planted, how much fertilizer, pesticide, and herbicide was applied, and how much was harvested. This is all vital data to both producers in Vermont if we are to preserve and protect our environment. Marie Audette of Blue Spruce Farm wrote an article that was published in Vermont Digger, which reflects these actions being taken by many of our Vermont dairy farmers. The modern dairy is run by professional business people, constantly learning how to care for their land and animals better. They regularly attend classes and seminars, involve themselves in conservation groups, and read trade magazines to grow their abilities to focus on maintaining healthy soils, which will return bountiful nutrient-rich crops. Over the years, I've witnessed extraordinary change within agriculture and within the agricultural equipment marketplace. Technology and innovation has enabled today's producers to accomplish in one day what might have taken several days or a week in 1970. For example, a Big M can cut, crimp, and windrow a hayfield at the rate of 20 plus acres per hour, and that's a large self-propelled mower. In 1970, each process required both a special piece of equipment and separate paths, and that 20-acre field might have consumed a day. I've also watched what feels like extremist views vilify our dairy farms. Recently, some espoused the need to transition Vermont's dairy producers to organic for a variety of reasons. Just a couple of years ago, even a former agricultural secretary of Vermont jumped on board this argument when our dairy producers were struggling with persistent low pricing. The wisdom of that idea seems to have been proven misinformed, as the organic pricing followed suit in commodity drops in pricing last year and limits to their producers. Of note, the 203 organic dairies we had in 2016 has now dropped to 187. We're limited by the markets we can develop, our infrastructure, the types and quality of our soils for pasture land, our debt structures, and other things that are not easily shifted without sending shockwaves through the Vermont economy. In the past decade, our dairy farm numbers have dropped by 38%. While the dairy cow numbers in Vermont has dropped only 10%. The change has been rather steady if you look at the USDA dairy data. In fact, our cow numbers dropped 10% in the prior decade as well. Of note, the total number of pounds shipped has remained fairly steady, reflecting a steady value to Vermont's economy that few other Vermont industries can boast about. Every county in the state has active dairy operations, the smallest of which is in Bennington County with 9, and the largest in Franklin with 110 dairies. Like many other industries, including my own, consolidation is being driven by cost increases. For instance, that Big M mower that I referred to sells for $350,000. Whereas the popular mower of 20 years ago sold for approximately $30,000. By margin reductions, by the need to professionalize, the aging of our farm owners, farm labor availability, and various other influences, many of which we have no control over. There's this current push for diversification, and that seems reasonable, but to be forthright, this has been occurring for a long time naturally. Our dairies also produce maple syrup. They grow commodities, farm pumpkins, host tourism via bed and breakfasts, board horses, raise beef, hogs, produce, or other products marketable at roadside stands or farmers markets. A couple of years ago, some farmers placed faith in the budding CBD market and planted acreage into hemp. To remain viable, some dairies have grown, some shifted to organic, some added diversity or niche on the farm processing, and some have exited. My belief is that we should be slow and steady in our promotion of solutions to the dairy industry, that we should be careful to understand the second order impacts of any proposed new rules, and that we should challenge those who oversimplify the impacts of changing our regulatory environment on the business plans our farmers have created given existing rules. After all, we compete in a national or even a world market, and Vermonters must, in the end, remain competitive to survive. And that impacts all of us. We were just talking with the House Ag Committee, and when you look at our neighboring states that have lost the larger farms and the dairies that supported the infrastructure, we need those larger operators to keep the infrastructure whole, and otherwise the infrastructure starts to crumble and it impacts the rest of the state and all other farmers involved. I trust that our VDPA organization can be a resource and work with you to help provide ground truths, how various bills and proposed regulations impact those of us working in the rural countryside of Vermont. We're currently working with Heather Schuldeis and her team at William Schuldeis and Associates to ensure our availability for testimony or for a consult should you have a need on any to get a thoughts our thoughts on any bills that you're looking at. And we have some of our farmers that are part of the BDP Alliance. They're here to testify how it's impacted on the farm in the past year.
Well, thank you, Brian. I know, you and your company has been a great help to our ag community, supplying equipment and services, and you've been a player in this for a long time, and we certainly all appreciate your steadfast work in this direction. So thanks a lot for being with us this morning, and certainly I've always worked in our committee has worked closely with the organization because you got quite a crew, and if you added up all the milk that came from the membership from you folks, it would take a few trailers to hold it all. So anyways, I don't know if Mr. Bordeaux's on next, or who you'd like to have on next, Brian. Did you want?
If I could just interject, Senator, I would like to invite Josh Poulin of Poulin Industries to speak on behalf of the industry and as a dairy farmer. And if Jacob Bordeaux can join, I will let you know.
Yeah, very good. And be glad to hear from Josh. He's almost a neighbor, just lives a few miles away from me, and been family friends for forever, I guess. Goes way back into the 50s or 40s. So welcome, Josh, and good to have you with us, and glad to hear from you.
Thanks, Mr. Starr. So I'll start by talking about the feed, obviously the feed business. So we'd have two separate entities kind of inside of our feed business. We have our bag division, and then we have our bulk division, which is primarily, mostly primarily dairy. We have a few beef customers and a few people that milk goats and those sort of things, but most of it's dairy. So I guess the biggest challenge we've seen, and I guess I should explain a little so everybody knows, but I'm the president of Poulin Grain here. We own 4 facilities, one here in Newport, Vermont, one in Swanton, Vermont, one in Bennington, Vermont, and one in Canton, New York. So we have the only facility that we bag feed out of is the one here in Newport. The other 3 facilities are strictly bulk, mostly dairy feeds. And then I also own a farm. My great grandfather was a farmer. My grandfather farmed, my uncle farmed, and now I farm. So I've got to see both ends of it, I guess, during this, at least on the feed side. So I guess for the most part, the dairies have, from an accounts receivable standpoint with us, have held their own. I think there's been a lot of challenges, both big and small, with dairies, given, looking at what was going to happen going into 2020, as we would call a normal year, and then all of a sudden ending up with a pandemic and milk price shifts in markets and base programs and, all the fun stuff that's happened in this year. So, as I said, as far as our accounts receivable go from the dairy end, that stayed, I think, given a lot of the government programs and some of the money that was laid forward, PPP and some of the other programs early on in this, kept everybody, I guess, even, if you will. So I think that was needed. So now we kind of go to where we are today. well, I'll talk about our bag business. Our bag business was one of those businesses that was kind of, the timing was right. March is kind of when people generally look at buying chickens and pigs and so on and so forth, if they're gonna. And given we had this, I think with people being worried about food security and some of those other things, they really, our bag business has grown probably, I don't know, I'll say 7 or 8% here in this year, given I mean, it's just luck, right? I mean, that part of the business, I guess, is what people were doing and how they felt, and probably some of these other stimulus money from the federal government with unemployment and some of that other stuff. People were at home, they had time to take care of animals, whatever it may have been. So I guess that's in the right place at the right time with that one. But on the dairy side, like I said, they've held their own. We've internally had some labor struggles given the whole, fears, and, everybody has, not everybody has the same feeling about how this pandemic is. So like I told the House Committee, I'm tired, but as long as everybody else is trucking along all right, it'll be okay. Managing has been extremely hard, both for the dairy end of the business and on the farm level. I think probably a lot of these producers that are on the line today have probably had a lot of different management things they weren't expecting. So where I'm concerned about dairy going forward is I don't know what this looks like, but given the 13% reduction in milk that was be able to produce if you're a DFA customer, or capping yourself on last year's production if you're an Agrimark producer, which are the two biggest co-ops that dairies in the state would ship to. And now if anyone follows markets, the grain markets have exploded, I guess, for lack of better words. We've seen $120 to $150 increase in whether corn or soy are the major ingredients here over the last 3 to 4 months. While milk has stayed relatively flat, and we're still on a base type program where, I think that when that happened, there was money available for the dairy, okay, we're getting these programs and all this stuff going on, but dairies are still, whether you're buying base from other farms or you're trying to consolidate, basically the co-ops are telling you that we want less milk, right? And we're gonna pay you for basically demand milk, and then surplus milk you're getting a different number for. And it's created a lot of different challenges. Not that if there wasn't enough before in dairy, now we've got these new ones that basically create more unpredicted futures as time goes on with what we're gonna see, whether the base stays. If you DFA 13%, it goes to 10, goes back to 15. Okay, that oversupply milk today, you might get $16 for it this month, and you might get $5 for it next month. Who really knows how those things are going to play out? And when you're trying to run a business, and growth has been a pretty important part. Brian touched on that just barely. Cow numbers have, he said down 10%, farms down, I think 30% or something, down 30. Cow farms down 30%. So 10% is still a lot to me, and 30% is a real lot when you start talking about available customers and who we're going to deal with in other states, and competing with kind of the country and the world as time goes on. I think we have our advantages. We don't always talk about them as much, but we also have some disadvantages, right, which we tend to lean on more. But as time goes on here, I think the challenge is going to be that's created another unknown, and they've still, no matter what group you're in, whether you're an Agrimark or a DFA producer, you definitely took a big hit to your bottom line. And when you look at how you're going to pay for things, and the cost of business just going up every year. Brian had a great example with a Big M, right? $30,000 back in 30 years ago, and now $350,000 now. And feed's no different. When I started in this business, we used to sell cornmeal for $89 a ton, and now, if you get it for $220 a ton, I guess today you're have a deal. So I think going forward, the state and I think everyone in food production needs to start thinking about how these things are going to look. Maybe not only just in dairy, but there's definitely in dairy going to be some challenges with the recent increase in feed prices and kind of the dairy staying level. And so I think I appreciate all the programs and the stuff that people have done federally and statewide, but I think the tougher months are to come for dairy farmers here in the beginning of 2021 here, and maybe through most of the year. So I guess that's a brief overview about where we're at industry wise. It definitely hasn't been an easier year to be in business, but overall, like I said before, I'm thankful we're at least in a essential business where we've been able to continue, and hopefully we can continue to provide and help the dairies in the state and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. You talked about you have 4 sites, 3 of them are here in Vermont. Could you tell the committee how many states do you deliver feed to, though, that's coming out of Vermont here and out of your plant over in Canton? You're on mute, Josh.
Oh, sorry. I'm trying to be good with the mute button there, but I'll come into it. So we deliver, thanks for the question. We deliver, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, a little bit into Maryland, and then obviously all New York. And we're shipping some of our bag feeds to Ohio and Florida. So we cover a pretty big region out of Vermont, and we're pretty proud of having those plants here and being able to do that.
So pretty nice having well, you're not a small company, but certainly started small here in Vermont, shipping feed all over the north, all over the East Coast, really. And anyways, it's good to have you with us. You didn't bother to tell us anything about your dairy operation, but I just say that to the committee, it's a very modern type dairy operation, I think, with about everything that's up to date and modern that you could possibly have, with robotic milkers right through to automatic cleaners. And no, it's quite an operation. I don't know if you wanted to take a minute just to explain that.
Yep, I can explain a little bit about that. Yeah, so I obviously super committed to dairy. It's how we started, similar to what Brian just said. And my grandfather's 96. He thinks it's important that he's still around. He thinks it's important that somebody farmed in the family. So the rest of them ran. So I'm the guy, and I guess I'm the right one to do it because I really love it. And so yeah, I built a dairy, and hence the it's got automatic feeding. So we have vectors. They're called vectors. Robotic milking, automatic barn cleaning, and the hope was that you could figure out how to. I'm not sure. I just being honest, without the other business, that could happen that way, because the investment in those things is big. But we have been able to produce and make really high quality product and do that pretty effectively with labor, which was. I was hoping to figure some things out with that, and I think I figured out that it's, given the economics today, that's not really going to be possible just to start. I think if somebody's in the game and they've started, and you're doing those things, investing in some of the technologies as far as like activity and breeding and some of those other technologies that's there, to help manage. I think those can pay themselves back fairly quickly. Some of the other stuff is a little bit longer term investment, and hence the reason, like in my case, I need a full barn. I need to milk 365 cows in my barn. That's what it can milk comfortably. And I've been milking about 330 most of the year, given where our base program is. So when I look at what that costs me, what that does to people that are investing, whether it's in technology or whether it's Amanda or Bill or the Gladstones or any of the farms in the state, right? Any of the guys we deal with, any of the smaller farms, bigger farms, doesn't matter. When they invest, even whether it's heifer barns or whatever it may be, you kind of got to be able to have the right number of cows in your barn, and you got to have that milk going out the door. And you got to be able to know, at least you got to have a good feeling that you're going to get paid. You've never really known exactly what you're going to get paid, but you had an idea. Now you got this other thing that's just, a whole nother level. So that's going to be a challenge. And, there's been a lot of trade of base and different things between farms. And I've had to do a little of that. And I think some of the other farms have, trying to, we're in an infinite game. The game's going to go on, whether it goes on in Vermont or New York or whatever these states may be. So I think without like finite games where there's defined rules, we don't have a lot of defined rules. But we have we're just trying to outlast the next guy in the game and keep that here. And I think as we move forward, like I said, in Vermont, we have some advantages, but for me, I got to be able to milk those number of cows. And I think if you talk to any other dairy producer in the state, taking that hit is going to continue to be quite a process, and you need to be able to invest in those technologies and it's a capital intense business. Dairy farming is. I think people underestimate how much money it really takes to get all this stuff done. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Amanda, who would you like to have up next?
I have our young farmer who is waiting on the phone to try to get in, and it says that he's waiting. So I'm not sure how we do that.
No, I think Linda, did he call Linda?
He's trying to call the phone number on Zoom.
Linda?
Okay. I'm not seeing him in the waiting room.
Okay, maybe you could just put in the chat a number he can call in. He's been having all kinds of technical difficulties this morning. And
sure, I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you, Amanda.
Thank you. So I guess I would go to Shannon and then Stephanie.
Yeah. Shannon, you're up.
Thank you. Shannon Hill, part of Four Hills Farm here in Bristol, Vermont. We currently are milking 2,300 cows. We are currently working on bringing in the next generation in to the farm. So we have 2 that are already come in as partners and 2 more that are working their way in as well. And so we're hoping to keep going. As far as the pandemic goes, I hadn't really thought about this last time, but we're talking about the capping of how much milk we can ship. We had our cap, and then COVID happened, and our breeding program, which you start 9 months before when you really want something to happen, had us in March having 330 calves. And the cows don't know there's a pandemic, and they don't know they're not supposed to give milk. So those first few months when we dumped truckloads, and when I say truckloads, I mean 65,000 pounds.
Every day?
No, only two at the end of the month, because we couldn't go over the cap for the pandemic. But because of that whole program, we had started being a little more aggressive on sending beef that we wouldn't have done before. Cows that just weren't bringing back, or that we might have tried again that we didn't. And so now we can actually, we aren't even reaching our cap now because we made all these changes based on the pandemic. And it's going to take us another 9 months to get caught back up again to where we were. So, we already had a cap planned, and we had planned to meet it. Would have hit June, really. We would have hit our cap in June. That was the plan. And then the pandemic happened. And so all the changes we made, and we really held off on the big changes until August or September on some of the bigger changes. But the dumping milk got to be too painful. And so now we're backpedaling. Now we're trying to get caught up to where we can be, where we want to be, which is really milking 2,500 cows and not 2,300.
Yeah. And where do you send your milk to one of the co-ops or?
Or Agrimark.
Yeah. And they cut their production by 10%, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a monthly thing, so it changed from month to month. They sent us a letter at the beginning of each month telling us what we could ship.
Yeah. Is there anything like the 25th check that co-ops used to do with profit that they made from, within their other businesses, like in the cheese or butter business? Is there anything like that that happens in today's world?
They do a dividend check once a year.
Yeah. So that's
I have
still,
yet to see those numbers, so I don't know if there will be a dividend check this year or not, but we'll
Yeah.
see.
and so you're back, you went from 2,300 animals to 2,500 now, or?
No, we were headed for 2,500, but we did a lot of heavy culling in
Yeah,
those months when we were dumping milk.
yeah. So you had to cut quite a bit then, or drop off quite a bit.
Yeah, we, like I said, we're 200 behind where we wanted to be this time.
And did you folks take advantage of the relief funds that we or the federal government had out there, and the state funds that we put together for dairy and other ag businesses to help?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think I missed a one, including PPP. So
Yeah, good. Yeah, any questions from the committee members for Shannon? If not, we'll move on to the next speaker. Linda, did the young farmer get through on the phone?
Not yet.
We can go to Stephanie, Senator, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Welcome, Stephanie.
Good morning. Thank
Good.
you all for having us today. My name is Stephanie Pope, and I'm a third generation farmer here in Addison County, right on the shores of Lake Champlain. Our farm was settled in 1958 and has been a dairy farm since 1958. We are current a medium farm operation and milk about 600 cows and farm between rented acres and home acres, 2,000 acres. We have 10 full-time employees and 5 full-time family members. We also supply milk to a small creamery on the farm here. And when the pandemic hit, it went to pretty much zero. We have built, or my sister has built the creamery business back up, but it's about a third of the supply of milk from 2019 to today. When COVID hit in the beginning of 2020, we thought it was going to be a great year. Cash flow looked good, markets looked good. COVID hit and kind of ripped the carpet out from underneath us. I was lucky enough to be on the first round of PPP, and that really saved us heartache and everything else. We were able to keep all of our employees through the pandemic, and then I honestly went from being a laborer to sitting in my office and looking for programs and applying for programs, grants. So every little bit helped. CFAP helped a lot. Now looking forward to the future, we signed up for the DMC, which cost us $7,500, and it only allots us 5 million pounds of milk, or it's only covered up to 5 million pounds of milk. And then, so we also are doing the DRP program, but all this insurance is costing us about 40 cents per CWT per hundredweight, which is an expense that we've had before. So it's, and all our milk is not covered. It's just too expensive to cover 100% of our milk, but we are trying to keep a floor, if you will, you know, so we can kind of plan ahead. So that's our story of 2020. We hope that 2021 is a little better, and we're trying to, like I said, keep a floor underneath us at this point.
Well, 2021 can't get much worse than 2020. We're all going to be underwater for sure. You said that you have a small, what is it, a pasteurizing or homogenizing dairy plant at the farm?
Yep. So my sister wanted to do, she wanted to stay in agriculture, but didn't want to, be on the cow side. So we built a small creamery and she makes cheese. And her niche has actually become cheese curds, believe it or not. So she, like I said, she supplied like the Chubby Muffin. It's a restaurant group in Burlington, and obviously when the pandemic hit, all her restaurants, supply went to zero overnight. And she's built it back up to about a third of what 2019 looked like.
Yeah, so it's cheese, not bottled milk or anything like that.
So we looked into bottling milk, and it's quite a process, and we actually decided not to pursue it at this time.
Yeah, I know, of course, I live near the Canadian border, and you go to Canada and every little store up there sells curd cheese. And it's expensive, but it's very good. And you notice the day they get it in, by the end of the day, the bags are all gone. So that's a good little market to get into, and it's too bad we didn't have more stores that carried it, because curd cheese is a good little snack with potato chips and the good foods that we have to enjoy. So anyways, are there questions from any of the committee members? No, so we'll move on. Have we gotten the person?
I don't think he's going to be able to join us, and I apologize, and we'll have to get him back. He has an interesting story, and I think you'd all be interested. So I'll work on getting him back before your committee, but I would like to point out a few things. Brian Carpenter is our new chair of Vermont Dairy Producer Alliance, and we do have 2 new members testifying today. Stephanie is a welcome new addition, and Walt is now on our board, Walt Gladstone, and so he's going to speak next.
Yeah. Morning. Who is it? Walter? Walt?
Yes, it's Walt. I think it's written on my little cue there. My tile is Will, but it's Walt Gladstone. Thank you, Senator Starr, for the.
I was going to say, by God, Will looks just like Walt to me, but.
Well, the funny thing is, if he was talking right now, most people would say we both sound the same. So we've got that in common. Well, thank you for this opportunity this morning to speak to you senators. We have 3 sons. Can you hear me okay?
You froze up, Walt.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start again. So I'm Walt Gladstone. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here this morning. My wife and I own and operate Newmont Farm. We have 3 sons. 2 of our sons are in business and in our partnership with us. And our 3rd son, John, is a local independent trucker that helps us out with our pumpkin operation. We've been here for 32 years. I can remember that pretty easily because that's the age of my oldest son. He was in my wife's belly the day that we bought this farm at auction. We currently, when we started out, I guess I want to even start back. I grew up in upstate New York, and I think this is a theme that I'll follow up at the end. But my dad had an operation of 34 cows, and we landed here in Vermont in 1988. And at that point in time, we were milking 120 cows. And today we're milking on just under 1,600 cows. We crop approximately 2,000 acres, and of that we grow about 200 acres of pumpkins. We are proud to have the next generation farming with us, helping us provide management and labor. Just speak a little bit, as Josh and everyone else has, to the last 12 months. As we all know, the pandemic hit us, and it really softened up demand. And at that point in time, as it's been pointed out, the co-ops asked us to reduce our milk. Our farm at that point in time near had built a barn for our dry cows, and we actually populated a barn that was next to our parlor, and we were going to milk another 150 cows. In March, they asked us to reduce the amount of production on our farm that matched that number of cows. So that whole investment in that barn and all those cows, now we were supposed to drop our milk production by that amount. In the beginning, we started out by calling heavier and making some calls, but we as a farm made a decision that we actually bought some beef from farmers that would get out of the business at that point in time. Over the summer, based on people wanting beef and pork, we actually started to retail some of our own beef and pork, mainly marketed through social media. A couple of things that we typically do on our farm is, for the last 5 years, we've had an open farm day the middle of the summer that we open up our farm to the public. And obviously with the COVID, that didn't happen. The other thing that we do is twice a year to the 5 neighboring towns, we put out a newsletter to talk about different things that are going on in the industry and to profile some of our employees. As we roll ahead in here to 2021, I feel fairly optimistic about the first 3 months when we talk about milk price. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek. That optimism is based on, most recently, the federal government has put, I guess, $1.5 billion toward the food box program. Maybe not all of it's in the food box, but that has increased class 3 milk price by as much as $2.50. And when I say that, as of the last 24 hours, looking at class 3, just to give you guys perspective, the class 3 milk price for February has actually dropped $1.50 in the last 24 hours. So the people that I try to lean on to learn about milk price, looking ahead this year, they predict that the milk price, our milk price, mailbox price, will probably fall somewhere between $14 and $19. So that's kind of the revenue side of it. Grain prices, as Josh pointed out, last summer, I remember this because I was listening to this this tape that was recorded almost every day. But once I got into pumpkin season in September, I stopped. At the end of August, the people that I was leaning on to listen to, they really felt that the grain market was long and we didn't have any real concerns and pressures that we needed to buy ahead on grain. Well, when that storm went through Iowa last summer and a lot of that corn went down, as of today, as Josh pointed out, the major ingredients, corn and soy, are up between 40 to 50%. And, you know, as I hear it, which is something that we all need to pay attention to, many of us farmers don't have a lot of that booked ahead. So a year ago at this point in time, we had in earlier years bought some milk insurance to get some price protection. But to be honest with you, you know, we did it enough times, never saw any return. And as a family without a lot of experience, we opted out. Well, when the pandemic came along and COVID and the milk price had just dropped by such a large margin, we all started to realize as dairy farmers, we better pay attention to this milk insurance. And so I think many of us at this point in time have bought DRP. And the thing that's interesting for you folks to realize, we're buying it like we all might have fire insurance at home. We hope that it won't pay out, but you're talking about 30 to 50 cents a hundredweight. And when you start figuring that what that means as a margin, those are really big dollars. We also participated in the other, it's called DMC insurance. And as I think one of the gals pointed out earlier, we only have insurance on that up to 5 million pounds. And why that is, it's not that we can't buy more, but it's so price prohibitive and it costs so much. And my point is, and I'm happy for those smaller farmers that get it at such a price reduction, but as you get up over 5 million pounds, the government's decided they are not going to subsidize it at that same level. So I guess a few of the messages that I'd like to just speak to a little bit is, as Brian and Josh had talked about earlier, we all know about how technology is making this industry change so fast. And the reality of it is, it comes at a big price tag, and not everyone else we're not gonna all adapt it at the same time. And for me, and the reason I started out my conversation is I grew up on a farm with 34 cows. I still want to be thought of as the same person. I still put my pants on the same way. And I don't know if I really want to be remembered and defined just based on how many cows I have. And my point here is, I think that there's an important place for all of us guys, whether you're a small farm or a large farm. You think about technology, you think about all the infrastructure that we need, whether it's fertilizer companies, the grain companies. At some level, the larger farms are going to help carry that infrastructure longer. And at some point, that's going to be a benefit to the smaller farmers. So I think that sometimes I get the sense that we ought to support the smaller farmers faster than the larger farmers. And I would contend we need to support all of us.
All farmers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, are there questions for Walt from any of the committee members? Walt, how was the pumpkin business?
The pumpkin business was really good. It was it kind of a little playing off that COVID. People were staying more at home. I think that they wanted to decorate a little bit more. I was sorry for the guys in southern New Hampshire with the drought. Their crop wasn't quite as good, but I was glad to help those guys in their markets and provide some of these good Vermont pumpkins to them. Yeah,
200 acres of pumpkins. I wouldn't even want to have to count that many pumpkins, but that's a lot of pumpkins, and that's good if you could get rid of them. Now, is that any kind of feed that you can feed animals? If there's some left?
Can you hear me, Bobby? Yeah. So the answer is yes, that they can be fed for dairy, but the fact of the matter is, I've often felt that it was too price prohibitive based on the labor to get them to the cows.
Yeah.
So I just like to talk to that, and I meant to earlier. I think labor is something that we have not mentioned, and that's a huge part of our cost structure. As we both know, labor and feed are our two biggest expenses, and with minimum wage going up, it's just a real big concern. How do we stay profitable based on margins and the cost of business going up and the availability of labor?
Yeah, well, the availability is probably the big issue.
That's
Yeah.
right.
What about, you're down there on the Connecticut River. Do you grow any soybeans or corn that you can use on your farm to mix in your feed rations?
You know, we're blessed that we're farming on this really great land. To answer your question, we don't have enough land to do that. Could we do it if we had more acres available? But right now, we're actually buying a couple hundred acres of both grass and corn, and diversifying some of our acres into pumpkins.
Yeah, I'll be darned. Yeah. Well, I know that's pretty good farmland down through there, if you can find it. Yeah.
That's right.
Any other questions from committee members? If not, thank you, Walt, and we'll be seeing you. Corey, you have a question? Or?
Yeah, it's not so much for Walt, but just for the whole group, you know, and I really appreciate everything you guys do. I don't know if you hear it enough. I know as a senator from Franklin County, I know how important dairy is, not just to the dairy farms, but businesses like Brian's. And, you know, I've got an industrial park full of manufacturers that require milk coming in the door to be productive. So we appreciate everything you do. You know, we don't have to, you know, necessarily, if you don't have the answers today, it's fine. But, you know, we hear the concerns, but what are one or two things we can do this year to help make your lives a little bit easier and your businesses a little more successful and sustainable?
Amanda?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And I think this is kind of where we're gearing up as we look at the next couple years, in really focusing on infrastructure. I think you're going to hear that theme a lot. And how can we make the infrastructure further developed in our state and not in other states? I think truly where we've lagged behind is enticing that infrastructure to come here. And that gives us more opportunities to be innovative and to diversify and to do cheese curds or yogurts or, you know, whatever it is that you're going to do. It does come down to infrastructure, and that takes money. And we're in a time where, you know, there's a lot of money going out the door, and we're very appreciative of that. And we know that can't be sustained, but if some of that money could be diverted to more long-term rebuilds of our economy, I think infrastructure. And I would just quickly incur in vocational education, because we are facing a job crisis across our state, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in. We all need, we need people who can show up on time. We need people who can, you know, pass a drug test. We need people who can just do the very basic jobs, and we can train. We can do in-house training. I don't think that really is the issue. But after COVID and the amount of stimulus money that went out, it's very hard to get people enticing to come and apply for jobs. And if they do apply for jobs, to continue to show up. And I think if there's a way to promote vocational training or job training across the board, it doesn't even have to be through the vocational ed programs. I think that would be a huge thing that our legislature could really work on immediately as we look to recovering from COVID. And I pass the floor to Stephanie to finish answering questions.
Yeah, Stephanie?
I will absolutely reiterate what Amanda said with, you know, vocational training, on-job training for people, especially people out of work. And also, you know, the permitting process, I know gets a little dicey here in the state, you know, whether it's the cost of the permit or just the process itself. So maybe look at some permitting process so, you know, businesses can expand easier or cheaper. You know, I am an Agri-Mart member, and I know we have heard at meetings before that, you know, they look at their Chateaugay plant to expand before the Middlebury plant, solely on two things. The permit process and also the labor issue. They have people lined up at their door in Chateaugay. So when they are going to make a capital investment, they're probably going to look at Chateaugay before they look at Middlebury for those two reasons.
Yeah.
Sorry, Senator, I just wanted to add one little piece too, is the fact that the age group of which we're hiring the most of is above 50 years old. And honestly enough, the biggest group, age group that we're hiring is, people who have retired, who want to continue to work, and that's between 60 and 75. So, I mean, that is quite an interesting perspective. And I think if efforts could be made in the younger generations, that's really what needs to happen. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I just wanted to put that piece out for consideration.
I bet they show up every day too when they're supposed to. But anyway, Walt, yeah, you had your.
Yeah, I just want to follow up to what these two gals have said. Regarding the permitting with our large farm permits right now, we've just went through the how tough it is in that economic environment out here in making decisions to move ahead with our operations. There are not exact timeframes that the ag department is working with us on if I want to do an addition. So if I start the process, there's no exactness to it, and that's real problematic. It's problematic from a financing standpoint, from an economic standpoint, of where the markets are. And I don't know if you people can have influence on that, but if we have, at least if we know where the lines in the sand are, we can start to make decisions. But if there's no line in the sand, you almost got to plan ahead on something you think you might do even before you're going to do it. And to Amanda's comment on infrastructure, I don't know if she's specifically referring to it as well, but I really think the state needs to find more manufacturing opportunities for milk. And what can we do to try to bring interested parties here to this state?
Well, I think that's very important to get some manufacturing in here to use up the milk, because the two major buyers have cut back on their taking of milk. We've got wonderful farmland and whether it's growing crops or what, and we have excellent farmers that like what they're doing. And we need more manufacturing. We're close to 60 million people within a short day's drive of them. So, we're sitting in the right place with the right amount of land and people willing to do the work if we could get the markets opened up. So, Amanda, who's up next?
That concludes our formal testimony, but we'd love to open up for questions across the board. I think we have a uniquely diverse group that would be happy to answer any questions you all would have.
Yeah. So are there questions or more comments from any of you as well? Brian, would you like to get back on?
I just had two comments, Senator Starr. One is a thank you for going light on change last year, but I think we need to ask for that again this year. There's always pressure to really make significant changes to agricultural practices in the name of water quality. I think it's time to let all the changes we've made take full hold and see. I mean, there's just such significant change that's happened in the last 5 years that it would be really nice to wait and see the science of the results of that. And especially in 2021, as we continue to have the impact of COVID, there's just too much for most of us business people to deal with, to also have to factor in changes in our practices. We're trying to survive through this COVID. And so I would ask of the committee to take that into account as you look at proposed bills. And then secondly, as the chair of the town of Middlebury Select Board, one of the things that we're working on and we really need state help on, and it comes down to the labor situation, is affordable housing for working class folks in Vermont. And so it's not in your committee, but it's something that we really need state support on.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. And before you folks got on, we had a group on talking about food security and ample food and how it's worked out. And one of the comments from the Agency of Education was, I hope if you folks want to make changes that they're simple and short, because our plate is so full of these new programs that the feds are coming down with, that's going to make it very difficult if we get into serious, big time issues. So are there other questions? Brian, Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to mention that, and not that everybody will agree with me, but to me, the watchword for the session is do no harm. And I think that can apply to a lot of different things, including the agricultural group we have here today. And I said the same thing when we had the Agency of Education. And I think all too often we maybe don't let enough time go by to see how things are working before we kind of knee-jerk reaction with something that might even be worse. So I'm in full agreement with Brian Carpenter on that. Mr. Chair, I do have to leave. I have a weekly meeting with the governor and the administration at noon. So
you're really moving up in the world if the governor will meet with you.
Well, I don't know that he'll be there today because he's quarantining, but maybe he will be. But I just wanted to thank all the folks from the dairy groups around the state and the farmers. And Shannon, I go by your place every time I'm still refereeing ice hockey games. So I leave from Rutland, I go up 116 and I go by your place on my way to Burlington. And I'm always impressed with your farm there at Fort Hills. So thanks for what you guys all do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Have a good meeting with the governor. Tell him he's doing a good job.
Yeah, he's your governor too, Senator.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's our governor, but they have done a heck of a good job with all the problems that we've been facing. And getting back to Walt for a second, in regards to that permitting and the timing, there's no reason why we can't speak with people at the Ag Agency and A&R to try to put some type of a limit on that. I know, I went through an Act 250 hearing last year, and they were real good about timing. I mean, if you got your paperwork in a timely fashion, they would get right back, and there's no reason for Ag to drag that on and be a long drawn out process. So we'll talk with Anson and the other crew over there about that issue. There are other, we've still got 5 minutes. Go ahead, Walt.
Well, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that, Senator Starr. And along with that, if we want to dive into one more of the weeds, farms that have got land base and waste storage facilities large enough to milk 1,000 cows, but I got land and waste storage.
You're kind of breaking up, Walt.
Addition on my barn for 200. It's a huge amount of time and just doing it, and what can we do to kind of.
We can't hear you, Walt. Well, you've even lost your screen now.
I'll ask Walt to send that comment to the committee, just so he can follow up with that, Senator Starr.
Yeah, yeah, and you could send it, he could send it, but the main thing is to try to get it so we can look at it. And so I guess that's gonna kind of wind us up today, but thanks a lot for your time this morning, and hopefully you can join us a week from tomorrow when we get that report from Michael Pishak in regards to the dairy pricing. I mean, what I've read through, it's a very heavy subject, and it'll be good to hear it from him, I think, to try to analyze what his people found out in regards to that.
And I would just like to say, on behalf of us, to your committee, we really appreciate your efforts last year and funding the COVID relief for our dairy industry. And your work was, we can't say enough how much we appreciate it. And we thank you for your time and look forward to ongoing discussions.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get some more money, but it looks like this first batch that's coming gonna pretty much be handled through the feds, and I guess it's more than half they're gonna control, and we'll get some for different subject areas, but it's gonna be pretty well defined. There isn't gonna be much loose money like we had last year, where we could get quite a little bit for our dairy folks. And
But we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
We'll stay on top of it. Chris is over in finance, and I'm across the hall in appropriations in the afternoon. So we'll stay awake and on top of it if we get any. Yeah. So again, thanks a lot. And I know Brian and Josh gave up the business time to be with us, and all you farmers in your business time. So thanks again. And if you ever run across something that you think we should hear and know about, feel free to call any one of us or call Linda, and we'll schedule you into a meeting. So